Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. You should have received a link to this year's annual statement via an Eventbrite email posted out within the last 30 minutes or so. And if you haven't received this, then a link to view the statement is in the chat box. Also, the document will be made available on the Commission's website. So if you want to go to nihrc.org, you can access the document there. For those who are interested in engaging with us on social media, the hashtag for this event is #AnnualStatement21, and the Commission's handle for Twitter is @NIHRC. We're also recording the event, and this will be made available online afterwards. Once we get started, for those of you who want to ask a question, please use the Q&A button on your screen. And we'll do our very best after the address from the Chief Commissioner to cover as many of your questions as possible. I may put some of them together in a general question if there's 3 or 4 in the same area, but we'll do our best to get through as much as we can. I think there might also be on this platform a raise your hand option. If you can see that on your screen, please don't use that function because your mic won't be picked up and we can't allow you to put your question directly as a consequence. So please ignore that option. Just put it in the Q&A box. And finally, just before we begin, please note that we're not able to comment on individual cases. So if you have a specific issue that you want to bring to the attention of the Commission, or if you're looking for advice, well, please after the seminar, go to info@nihrc.org. Or again, you can go to the website and you'll get more details like telephone numbers and contacts with regards to any individual queries. Every year, the Commission's annual statement, and many of you will have been many times before, is launched as part of the Northern Ireland Human Rights Festival. And this year is no different. There's lots of fantastic online events that have already taken place and some are still to come. So please check out the festival website if you can. It's nihrf.com. And we're also kindly hosted, again, as many of you will know, by the Speaker of the Northern Ireland Assembly. It's really unfortunate that for the 2nd year running, we've had to make the decision to move to an online format rather than welcoming everyone to Stormont. However, health and safety is, of course, paramount to us all at the minute. So unfortunately, online is what we've had to turn to. Nonetheless, the relationship with the Assembly is key to the delivery of so much of the content of the annual statement. And I'm delighted, therefore, to welcome once again the Speaker, Alex Maskey, to open the launch. Over to you, Alex.
Okay, David, thank you very much for your introduction there, and welcome to everybody there, ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon. And I'm delighted to welcome everyone to this Zoom webinar to launch the Human Rights 2021 annual statement. As David has already advised you as to why we're online this morning rather than in person. And again, I also share his disappointment that we're unable to be live in person, but anyway, we're all used to this technology that we have to use to keep everybody safe. First of all, I would like to extend a very strong and special welcome to the new Chief Commissioner, Alison Kilpatrick, who took up her post, as you know, in September, and I want to wish her well for her term of office. And I did have the good fortune to work with Ali in the policing board as far back as 2011, and I suppose I've followed her career to this point, and I want to commend her and congratulate her for taking up this role. Of course, she'll have big boots to follow after Les Allenby, and I want to thank the outgoing Chief Commissioner, Les, who developed an excellent working relationship with the Assembly and whose work is reflected in part in this statement today. I want to wish Les well for his next endeavours. I'm sure whoever he works with, he'll be keeping people on their toes. But now, thankfully, alongside a number of other key events in the run-up to Christmas time, sponsoring the annual Human Rights Statement is now something of a standing commitment in the Speaker's Christmas programme. And I don't allude to any particular parties either, for that matter, given the focus on Downing Street. The focus on COVID-19 over the last year has been very important. And as we begin to emerge, hopefully, from the pandemic, other issues that affect the public as a whole and which affect all of our daily lives have begun to be addressed, thankfully. Now, addressing these issues, improving the experience of our whole community, and particularly the most vulnerable, can and should best be achieved by an active, devolved Assembly and Executive. The fact that an Executive was only re-established in January 2020, followed shortly thereafter by the onset of the pandemic, created very specific challenges for all of us. Now, despite those challenges, I think it is extremely positive that the Assembly itself is currently dealing with a significant amount of legislation, and I do hope that as much legislation as possible will be able to complete its passage by the end of the current Assembly mandate, which will be effectively on dissolution in and around the end of March. And that legislation, I hope and expect that it should benefit each and every one of us across our community. The connection between the Speaker's Office and the Human Rights Commission is formally set out in the Northern Ireland Act as part of our legislative process. However, my predecessors now have been happy to go beyond that in providing constructive support. And I'm pretty disappointed myself, I have to say, in my second year as a Speaker, that we haven't yet been able to continue to build and deepen those relationships between the Commission and the Assembly and the Executive team. But that's for the work ahead due to the virus. I therefore do welcome the fact that the Human Rights Commission is again holding this event to mark its annual statement. As Speaker, my view is very clear that the more voices and perspectives are included in the debate and the more sources of advice and expertise which are available, the better and more informed the outcome is likely to be for all of us. The relationship between the Assembly and the Human Rights Commission has the potential to benefit both the role of individual MLAs in assisting their constituents and, most importantly, all of us, the Commission and the Assembly, in focusing our efforts on those matters where the government of the day can most improve the lives of our citizens. We will do this best, in my view, by keeping human rights and equality at the heart of all of our deliberations and our decision making. And on that note, the annual statement of the Human Rights Commission therefore provides the Assembly with additional insight and analysis. There is no shortage of issues for the Assembly to address, and there's certainly no shortage of issues for you to discuss today. So it just remains me, folks, to wish you all the best for today's event and to wish each and every one of you a safe and a happy Christmas. And I look forward to Alison's first annual statement. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Alex. I know you're going to stay for a bit, and then unfortunately you have other commitments and have to leave. So thanks again for your support and for that of your office.
Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce Alison Kilpatrick. So Alison is our new Chief Commissioner, and many of you will already know her. I have to say, we were delighted when she was appointed and announced by the Secretary of State at the end of July, because as you know, the Commission itself has no influence on who's charged with this important role. But I have to say, as a barrister specialising in public law, human rights, socioeconomic rights and policing, Alison's credentials are second to none. Having formally taken up the post in September at the Commission, we like to put our new Commissioner straight to work. And Alison has certainly not been hard done by on that score. Alison also doesn't need to take my word for that, because all of her predecessors, including Les, can attest that their experience in this regard would have been exactly the same. However, the start of Alison's tenure has come, of course, at a really difficult and challenging time, with demands stretching from the impacts of the pandemic to our new and very complex mandate to protect rights after Brexit. So we're very pleased to have such an experienced hand take over at the tiller, and I'm delighted to introduce to you all the new Chief Commissioner, Alison, to deliver her thoughts on this year's annual statement. And please remember to use the Q&A, and I think it should be open now. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you, David, and thank you for welcoming me so warmly. Mr. Speaker, thank you for hosting this event and for your words of welcome as well and encouragement. I really was struck by what you said about putting human rights at the centre of everything, and that's certainly what I, as Chief Commissioner, will be looking to do in the next few months and years. As a new Commissioner with a whole 3 months behind me and all the experience that's come with that, I can say I'm really looking forward to working with you and your colleagues at the Assembly and to building upon the positive relationship already established. Unfortunately, and I add to what David and the Speaker have said, it is unfortunate that we weren't able to host you in person. I think an awful lot is lost by the failure to interact as human beings, particularly given the subject matter. I was really looking forward to seeing you all. Some of you have worked with in the past, but I fear we must wait a little longer. I was also hoping to thank Les Allenby, my predecessor in person. I'll simply send out a big thank you and hope he's there to receive it. Much of this work in this statement was under his very able stewardship. So today the Commission is launching its annual statement, the 10th such statement. It's a hefty document. It's difficult to carry around, but well worth reading. It's available on the website and in hard copy. And if you're asking for a hard copy, I would simply suggest that you ask for a bag to go with it. We have those too in the Commission. And I'm joking, of course, to some extent, because this statement is a significant record of everything that has happened over the previous 12 years. What has been, 12 months. It almost could be 12 years, it's 300 pages long. What has been done or not done, but it's also a human rights handbook containing a potted summary of relevant standards combined with recommendations for the future. Now, you might be disappointed to hear I don't intend to go through all of it. I don't want to pick out issues in a short session that can't do justice to the nuances and risk misrepresenting the importance of other issues. I have 20 minutes to speak. I hope to be shorter than that because I really want to use the opportunity for questions. But I've learned to my experience that I do often fill the time. David is going to cut me off, I think, if I go too long. You can, I hope, during the question and answer session, ask about the pressing concerns as you see them, and David and I will try and answer them, and we'll be as honest as we can. I'm still very much learning. I'm feeling my way in a new organisation, and will unashamedly make use of the expertise and lived experience in our virtual room today, so please do share it with us. And in passing, I should admit, I recognise the irony of launching a legalistic document that's nearly 300 pages long while going on to say what I am about to say. But there is a place for legal precision, for rights to be seen as legal standards, which must be complied with, and for the careful recording of facts. Facts can be elusive if not written, put down in writing. So this is an important historic document as well as everything else. Over the past 12 months, the Commission has had to discharge the new statutory responsibilities concerning the withdrawal agreement and protocol. Now, that's a massive topic that deserves its own session. What I can say today is that we have a dedicated team of professionals who are real experts in this area and who are working relentlessly to ensure the protections in the protocol are met. Eilish Haughey is the director of that department, and she wants to hear more. She wants to make sure she's kept up to date. What the Commission is working towards ultimately is a way of engaging and representing our work that serves all of those purposes, the legalistic framing, the record of what's happened, the record of facts, but also in a way that is easier to follow, more accessible and practically focused. And we'd like to take your views on that in the coming months. And while I would never be able to go through a year's work in any detail with this launch during Human Rights Week, I should at least be able to refer to the practical realisation of the state's responsibilities, not only to refrain from violating individual human rights, but also to promote and fulfil the human rights need of each and every person individually and in groups. I should be pointing to our annual statement and welcoming the progress over 12 months. I should be telling you how we have achieved real change on the ground. And I can do some of that in the statement. This annual statement certainly has some positive things to say, but I regret to have to say that nearly 73 years after a fledgling United Nations codified its International Treaty of Rights, 68 years after the European Convention on Human Rights, and 21 years after the passing of the Human Rights Act, I feel compelled to use this opportunity today instead to return to the basics, to advocate for the protection of human rights as the core function of the state and all public bodies. I also regret that I must express disappointment that for another year, the list of things to be done has grown as the list of things done has shrunk, and that's all within an environment of increasing division, hardship and instability. It's not unusual amid crises, and we're certainly in the midst of one at the minute, for people to become frightened, for other rights to be denigrated and replaced with a vaguer concept of human responsibility, to be tempted to stockpile protections for ourselves and our own families, much as we do stockpile toilet rolls and pasta over the last 18 months. And suddenly human rights, certainly the universality of rights, becomes something we can't afford. And in any event, we hear not everyone deserves them. Really only those who've proved themselves worthy should enjoy their protection. But that is the very antithesis of human rights. It's the very antithesis of what the Commission has been and will be seeking to achieve. It's far from inevitable. At the start of this pandemic, the community responded in many cases with compassion, selflessness, and basic human decency. And that's the very embodiment of human rights. Instead of recognizing that and following that lead, what we have seen is a debate about human rights that is negative, that exploits division, and that leads to further instability. Recent calls, for example, to scrap the Human Rights Act are not only unhelpful, they are misguided and dangerous. The intention of those who drafted the Declaration of Human Rights and thereafter the Convention was that it would be a framework of principles flowing from our understanding of what it is to be human. They recognise that society as a whole is demeaned by the denigration of human rights, and that all benefit from their protection, no one is disadvantaged by their application. The rights themselves are basic rights, which it was believed any civilised society would take for granted, and that has not changed. If there's any criticism that can be directed at the application of the Convention or the Human Rights Act, it's probably that it's too basic and hasn't evolved in line with other international standards. At the Commission, we do take account of all international standards, but our effectiveness is limited because many are not incorporated into domestic law and therefore cannot be enforced by us or anyone else directly in court. We do, however, continue to recommend that those treaties that have been ratified are put into practice by incorporation. And for example, we continue to call for the Convention on the Rights of the Child, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Conventions on Elimination of all forms of discrimination, Convention in discrimination against women and also minority ethnic people to be brought into force. What I think we are discovering, I think particularly now that we're having to do more online and not maybe seeing people in person, is that as a society, but also as a commission, we need to communicate our work and the real application of human rights better and build on that, not throw away what we've already achieved. That's what was intended when a Bill of Rights was contemplated for Northern Ireland. It was to be an enhancement of protection for the people in Northern Ireland who have suffered and continue to suffer. It was to address those things that strike a chord when you speak to the public, such as health, housing, education, welfare. And while things have stalled, there is still an opportunity to progress that work, and the Commission looks forward to assisting on it. It's ready to help. Human rights are not political, and a Bill of Rights should not fall as a result of politics. One of the arguments against the Bill of Rights, or indeed any advancement in human rights protection, which I've heard a lot, is that it is undemocratic because it deprives the state from implementing policy which the majority has voted for. And that can be superficially appealing, but only if you're confident that you always be on the right side of any vote. While a human rights approach may sometimes limit the power and reach of the majority, it's a fundamental principle that the majority should not dictate policy regardless of its impact on a minority group. The Convention views a democratic society as one which is characterised by pluralism, tolerance, and broad-mindedness. And who wants it to be otherwise? When asked in those terms, the answer is rarely. Anyone will rarely put their hands up to wanting anything different. As I said, democracy values everyone equally, even if the majority does not. So seen that way, the application of international human rights standards is democracy itself. But with that, there are also challenges. There's much more effort that needs to go into identifying issues for priority treatment. It would be too tempting for the Commission to simply respond to the groundswell of opinion or the priorities chosen by radio shows. We can't do that if we're to honour our statutory functions. We must also identify and advocate for those people or issues that might be unpopular, but which raise human rights concerns. And that can sometimes pitch us against government or even against public opinion. But I'm proud to say this Commission does not shy away from its responsibilities. The Convention laid down certain basic rights, but also critically determined that the rights would be enjoyed by individuals equally, regardless of identity, nationality, status, or opinion. It was hoped that the so-called wisdom of the majority would not turn into the tyranny of the mob. Human rights are easily allowed for those who remind us of ourselves, but mean nothing unless they apply to protect minority groups and those whom society deems unworthy of protection. And we must continuously remind ourselves of that. And even if you're not convinced by that, think of it this way. You might not be a member of a minority group today, but you might well be one tomorrow. Human rights have become a very easy scapegoat for all that has supposedly gone wrong in society. And that's not helped by outlandish claims in the tabloid press, rolled out often with salacious pleasure to denigrate human rights. For example, the notorious sexual predator Dennis Nielsen was given access to pornography in prison because of the Human Rights Act. He wasn't, yet this is still being repeated. Or that a hostage taker was plied with takeaway food while he pointed a gun to his hostage's head. because the Human Rights Act required it. It didn't. He was given a McDonald's meal, but not because of the Human Rights Act, because the police were trying to distract him while they put a snatch team in place. That example is still being trotted out as a reason why the Human Rights Act needs to be scrapped. This sort of disinformation continues, and so long as it does, I will continue to have to speak in these basic terms to champion human rights. It undermines our ability to tackle the daily consequences of breaches and makes human rights seem more remote. The Commission wants to address this, some by raising awareness and educating. We know we can't blame people who read this stuff in the media if they think human rights work against them. That's what they're being told. We have to show them that they don't. And that's why the Commission is going to work very hard on its education and engagement programmes. As the years progressed, there's been greater emphasis on partnership working and real engagement with the community. Human rights cannot be assessed in a sterile environment. It must be informed by the people of Northern Ireland. We want to become more effective at doing that and to reach those who would not ordinarily contact the Commission or read an annual statement or join us today virtually. We see it as critical that if we're going to do our work, capacity within communities is built so that people understand what human rights standards are, can feel confident about using them, and make best use of the services that are available to assist them and identify what more is needed. So if you have any advice for us or want to work with us, please do contact us and feed into our strategic planning process that's ongoing at the moment. And Claire Martin, Director of that department, is very keen to engage with you all and is developing a new programme which we hope to roll out in due course. I think part of the problem with all of this, it seems to me, is that in the midst of the negative rhetoric, human rights are seen at best as ideological, theoretical, or as put to me recently, just a lot of hot air that helps nobody. And I was speaking with some very astute young people, and one asked me if what he said was, do you mean what you say? Or are you just another spoofer? And I have to say, after I stopped laughing, I had a lot of sympathy for that young man. He didn't feel his human rights being protected in any part of his life, not in the home, at school, in the GP surgery, or in the streets. In his short life, he told me of the multiple deprivation. We'll have to say he didn't call it that. He used much more colourful and probably accurate language. But the multiple deprivation that he and his family had suffered and continued to suffer. He told me he had no hope that was going to change any day soon. He then added, on top of all that, prevailing threats and risk of violence from criminal gangs is an issue, not just low attainment he's worried about, but the prospect of being taken down an alleyway to be beaten or shot. And it's hard to conceive of a worse human rights breach, and it should be seen as such. We need to find space to talk about all these difficult things and be honest about them. Perhaps we've been reluctant in the past to get involved in some issues. The Commission can and should be a safe place to discuss these things using the language of human rights, which threatens no one. I reminded that young man in the course of our conversation of the Human Rights Act and that he could go to court to enforce his rights. And I'd say even I blushed at his response to that. And he had a real point. If he can't enforce his rights, what good are they? And he certainly didn't have the resources to go to court and had no platform from which to raise his issues. In any event, he was struggling to just get by on a daily basis. And that's why the Commission's legal work, providing advice through its law clinics, supporting litigation and bringing proceedings in its own name is so important. It has the possibility of helping that young man both by advising government on how it should protect his rights in future and holding it to account if it doesn't. This year, we have achieved real change in, for example, provision of reproductive health services and in relation to rehabilitation of offenders, but we've only just scratched the surface. We have more to do. Rhiannon Blythe is Director of Legal. She's looking forward to taking up new cases and assisting in others, so do please contact her at the Commission. We also need to exercise our other powers as well, to investigate, to educate and to raise awareness with a real discipline and focus. And that's precisely what we intend to do, and we'll be arguing for greater financial support to do that. Policy work is another critical element of what we do and is reflected in this annual statement. It's not a talking shop for human rights, and certainly not for human rights geeks like the few of us who you can see on the screen. By influencing policy, we can help to ensure that human rights run throughout everything, and that's what our speaker said when introducing the statement today. We try to get in before any damage is done and remind those who are responsible for implementing policy what their human rights responsibilities are. And you'll see throughout the statement recommendations that before any decision is made or action taken, policy should be subject to human rights impact assessment. And we note progress in relation to a lot of departments who are doing just that. We will continue to recommend that, but we don't always hear in time. So if you have any insights into policy or practice on the ground, we'd love to hear it. And Julia Buchanan, for example, has her expert eyes and ears across all policy developments can help, but she needs more input from you to identify what we might be able to hear so we can catch all these issues. So while I said I wasn't going to go into specifics, I do want to give 2 examples. Coming to an end, you'll be pleased to hear how the Human Rights Commission approaches its work and will continue to do so, and hopefully to demonstrate to you the importance of a human rights-based approach. So instead of using 2 examples, instead of seeing homelessness as a problem on our streets, which can be dealt with as a policy issue, we see the people who do not have a home or any chance of enjoying their rights in the context of the grave human rights violations they suffer. Not all homeless people are the same and need different solutions. We then work to redress that in policy and law, certainly, but also as a matter of practice, using our legal powers if necessary. Taking another example, in the case of disabled persons, we don't see that as an issue, in inverted commas. We see a number of people whose rights, whose access to rights protection has been limited by society, by the majority of us who don't have a disability. Not all disabled people are the same and shouldn't be treated as if they were. In both cases, we realize it's not the issues, but the people that matter. And I recognize that throughout, I have referred to issues because we've always traditionally done that, and obligations are often collected under that umbrella term. But I think we have to be better at distinguishing that from the people affected by the issues. Now, I realize this first speech of mine as Chief Commissioner might sound a little negative in itself, and I don't want to be. I don't mean to be only negative. I'm hopeful we can go some way to addressing the negative rhetoric and moving the discussion on, and in doing so, making a real difference on the ground. The first and most encompassing challenge will be countering the hostility or apathy that is around at the moment, which will only get worse if we do not reach people and help them claim their rights. I'm looking forward to next year when I don't need to repeat any of this, and the audience is full of members of the public who have been helped directly by the Commission or simply inspired to think again about human rights. I'm really enthused by the role I've been given and the challenges ahead, and alongside my fellow commissioners and the team at the Commission, we will try to overcome the distrust and apathy that is surfacing and enthuse others by proving that human rights are a good thing for everyone and they protect everyone. Now, I want to mention one commissioner in particular, because she was deeply involved in this work in the last 12 months, but passed away sadly in September. Maura Muldoon was a tireless advocate for real change and practical focus, and we will try to honour her by achieving just that. So I'm going to end with a quote, despite my fear that you'll find it corny or ideological, but it comes from a man with a bigger and better brain than mine, Eli Wiesel, who said this: "Indifference is not a beginning, it is an end, and therefore indifference is always the friend of the enemy, for it benefits the aggressor, never his victim, whose pain is magnified when he or she feels forgotten. The political prisoner in his cell, the hungry children, the homeless refugees, not to respond to their plight not to relieve their solitude by offering them a spark of hope, is to exile them from human memory, and in denying their humanity, we betray our own." So as corny and as trite as words like that can sound, it really does bear repeating, and I think it goes to the heart of what the Commission has and will continue to do. Everything else flows from that, so if we can get that right once again, then I think everything else will follow. So I think at that point, I should invite David to get stuck into the questions, and I'll do my very best to answer those. But thank you very much for joining us, and thank you again, Alex, for what you said at the beginning, and I really do look forward to working more closely with you in the future.
Thank you, Alice. We've got some questions in already, unsurprisingly, and I'm just going to work my way through them, and hopefully we'll get to the bottom. The first question is with regards to the rights of pensioners, and it's juxtaposed against the rights of prisoners. And it asks, does the Human Rights Commission believe that prisoners should be treated better than pensioners? Pensioners are a forgotten group, and there's a number of examples as to how prisoners are afforded particular protections.
Well, perhaps in a general sense, what I can say is that no group of people is better than any other. No group of people should be treated better than any other. But treating everybody in exactly the same way doesn't afford different groups equal protection. So what we look to do is ensure that the particular vulnerabilities, so for example, pensioners and also for prisoners, are protected, that they're identified and thereafter processes put in place to protect them. I'm not aware of any decision the Commission has ever made, or indeed a decision I'd be prepared to stand over, where we sat down and considered who would come first, a pensioner or a prisoner. We haven't certainly pitched them against each other, and I don't think that human rights does that. Sorry, I thought that was telling me you'd lost my sound.
Nope, that's great, thank you.
One other thing I should say is, and I hope this gives you some comfort in relation to pensioners' rights particularly, we do concentrate in this annual statement on the peculiar and particular vulnerabilities of older people displayed during the COVID pandemic. And we're working much more closely with the Commissioner for Older People in Northern Ireland, for example. So we do take very seriously what you say. It certainly isn't how human rights are supposed to work, but if it is, then we'll set out to correct that.
And I know, if I might say, one of the issues that we are looking at, just for that question at the minute, is social care. And in terms of the examples of things that are paid for, paying for social care is something that the Commission is live to at the moment, and I know it has received some media coverage. The second question, Alison, is could you say something about the Commission's view on the independent review of the Human Rights Act and what engagement we'll have with any proposals, if there are them, to amend the Act?
Well, you may regret that, whoever asked that question, because you could be here all day now. What I'll confine my answer to is this: the Human Rights Act, in my view, and I think in the view of the Commission, was the single most important move forward in ensuring very practical, real application of human rights and giving people, and we've just heard about prisoners and pensioners, it gives pensioners that opportunity to go to court and argue the points about paying for social care or closure of a care home or getting access to visitors, for example. It's the Human Rights Act that enables you to do that in your county court right through to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. I am nervous when I hear people talk about reviewing the Human Rights Act, that it needs somehow to be brought back into shape, that something has gone wrong. I don't think anything has gone wrong with the Human Rights Act. I think something has gone desperately wrong with the way we talk about it and the discourse around it. And we use, as I said, some disinformation and misinformation when talking about the Human Rights Act. That's what needs to be corrected, not the Human Rights Act itself. If an independent review is conducted, it should say, in my view, that the Human Rights Act needs strengthening, not realigning. And it should say that there isn't a difficulty encountered in the application of the Human Rights Act, other than it could be made even more effective and enforceable. We will be engaging, we hope. We offer views. David might be able to tell you, because most of it would have been before my time, in terms of our actual engagement in the past in relation to the independent review. If it hasn't been comprehensive, because we've not been asked for it, that would worry me. But David might be able to say a few words on that.
Yes, well, the Commission has engaged on this subject in the government-led consultations on a number of occasions. And for those that are interested, you can actually see all those submissions on the Commission's website. The other thing with regards to the subject generally is, as many of you will know, probably everyone will know, we're only one of 3 UK-based national human rights institutions. And we work very closely on this specific subject with the Equality and Human Rights Commission in GB and the Scottish Human Rights Commission. So the combined positions in terms of the protection of the Human Rights Act is core to what the 3 commissions do together. And fundamental to our position as well, and funny, I was asked this question in a different session yesterday, is the fact that the domestic effect, given the European Convention on Human Rights, is a commitment entered into by the UK government in the Good Friday Agreement. And of course, the Good Friday Agreement underpins the Commission itself. So we're very active, have been in the past, and I'm assuming will continue to be in the future to protect the Human Rights Act. There's a question from Fiona, Alison, asking, given the misogyny and male toxicity in Northern Ireland, and given that during the pandemic, 2020. It is one of the highest rates of domestic abuse incidents since records began. What actually is being done and going to be done to improve the situation of women and girls and their standing in this country?
You might be unsurprised to say I agree. There is a problem which has to be addressed, and we need to stop referring to the problem and actually look at real solutions to how we address this once and for all. Domestic and sexual violence is at an all-time high. Northern Ireland has higher incidence than almost anywhere else. We need to be honest with ourselves about why that is. The Commission certainly will keep advocating for greater protection. We'll keep using its powers in relation to advising on legislation, policy, through our advice clinic, but also, I think, most importantly, working with those expert organisations who know how to deal with this. So working closely with Women's Aid, working with all those other support groups. And there is a new Family Justice Centre to be set up next year, to be opened next year. And we look forward to supporting them in that work as well. It should simply be a matter of time, but I know it's not as easy as that. And those of us who work in this area have been saying that for many years. It's only a matter of time. The sheer quantity of women is often pointed to as the answer, that because there are a lot of numbers, particularly in positions like myself now, that there isn't remaining a problem. We know that's not the case. It's not quantity, but it's what is actually done and embraced by society as a whole. So maybe, Fiona, you would come and meet with me at the Commission, and certainly we can talk about this further, and you can tell us what you think we could be doing differently.
Thanks. There are 3 questions in, and I'm going to take 2 of them together and then jump down the page to the third. The first 2 are from Martina and Tina, and they're to do with vulnerability in care homes, and in particular over the COVID period. So Martina's asking, she's pointing out there's been a breach in her view of human rights in the last 20 months, families being locked out, and this is their home from home. Tina similarly is saying, what about the rights of care home residents and their families whose human rights continue to be breached throughout the pandemic? So a similar tone. And Martin is making the same issue. He's pointing to the content of the annual statement. Says he's really interested in the visitation and care homes piece in the statement. And would the Commission feel that the Department of Health need to put greater pressure on private care home operators to ensure visitation rights for residents? So you have 3 questions, quite similar vein.
You might have to remind me, David, if I don't cover all of that, but I will take it that there is a general theme to what I'm being asked. I recognise that it's to do with not being able to visit your family. And I immediately recognise that that has an impact on your Article 8 Convention rights, to right to family, respect for family and private life, but also your family not to be visited by you and to have that comfort, which we all need in a time of crisis, particularly a health crisis. I'm not going to pretend that this is simple or I know the answer. And that's because part of some of the factors to be taken into account are health and science, and I'm not an expert in those. So we have to an extent, trust the scientists and the health experts to tell us. But if we want to trust them, they have to give us more information, in my view. They have to explain it better, perhaps, and maybe assuage some of the concerns people have that these are decisions that are being taken on a blanket basis rather than an individual care home basis. Obviously, there are rights, many different rights at play. There are rights of your loved one. There are rights of all the other vulnerable people within the care home, rights of the staff, etc. All of those require a balance. And I am not equipped to be the one to decide where that balance lies. But I do want to know that those who do make those decisions have considered all of the options and have approached it from a human rights perspective. So not just to say, we'd like to keep everyone out because it makes our job easier, but that they've said this is required, this is necessary, it's proportionate, and we've considered the rights of those in the home, the staff, and those visiting. So that doesn't give you a precise answer, but I hope it gives you an indication of how we would want to see the decision-making in relation to closure of care homes and visiting. And in relation to the question about the department engaging with private healthcare providers, What I would say to that is, while a care home may be private, but it's in receipt of public monies in a lot of cases, and it is discharging a absolutely fundamental public service. So it should be held to the same human rights standards. And the way we ensure that at the Commission is that we ensure the department has proper oversight and has in place a proper guidance from a human rights perspective that applies to all care homes, whether public or private.
If I could just add just to those three as well, I know the Commission, again, is available and to meet with regards to discuss those issues, and a number of people have approached us already. So feel free to get in touch with the team, and we'll be delighted to discuss the individual circumstances. There's a question from Ivanka, again, COVID related. A recent article in The Detail investigates disproportionate number of BME people fined for alleged breaches of COVID-19 regulations. These concerns continue to be relevant in 2021, and how can the rights of BME people be protected during the pandemic?
Ivanka, you can come back to me if I don't now summarise what I think the key issue is that you're raising, and that's less the disproportionate impact of COVID itself, although we have to, that has to be filtered into our response to it. If it's having a disproportionately negative impact on some people, particularly people from a Black minority ethnic background, then our response should also be focused on that. But just dealing with, I think, your point, which is more about disproportionate policing, perhaps, of the COVID restrictions. And you'll have seen what was said recently about policing of the Black Lives Matter protest, etc. There should not be discrimination in policing. There should not be discrimination in the delivery of any services. And those people who have more vulnerability should be protected to a greater extent necessary to enable them to have equal access to their rights and equal protection for it. Other than saying that we will continue to look, we will continue to work with our statutory partners and with NGOs and the third sector to try and address this wherever we see it arising. This is a big issue. It's a wide issue. It's never, a little like domestic and sexual violence, I don't think it's ever really been tackled head on. And now probably is the time that we do that. This pandemic has revealed a lot that we probably guessed before, but it's now been proved beyond doubt. And again, Ivanka, I would say to you, come to the Commission. Please do make contact with us. We are working with a number of people, a number of organisations, but every voice helps.
Sorry, we've had a couple of others in that are COVID related, so I'm just going to deal with them. Paul Stevenson, I know your question is moving up the list and I haven't addressed it yet, but I will come to it. We've one from Nicola Mallon and another one from an anonymous one as well. So Nicola's asking, can you set out more detail on the Commission's recommendations in terms of the public inquiry into handling COVID, its standing, who it should be led by, remit, scope, etc.? I know it's received some media coverage as we've been on this call. And an anonymous one is around the issue of the possible creation of a two-tier society with having to produce medical papers and the threats of vaccine mandates. So one about a possible inquiry, the other one about access to facilities, goods, services.
In relation to the inquiry, for all the reasons that have been given really by people here, and some I hope of my answers already dealt with this, what it tells us is that people still don't know why a lot of these decisions are being taken, or why decisions were taken in the past, or what the consequences of failure or to take decisions or decisions that have been taken. There needs to be, the public need to be able to see what has been done in their name and what we can do going into the future. There's no point in having an inquiry that simply looks back. You need it when there's time to actually make a difference. And this virus isn't going away. We know that now. So there are lessons we need to learn for the immediate future, not just the longer term. In terms of the actual format of the inquiry, there is a very technical, long-winded answer to that, Nicola, which is about which act such an inquiry would come under, whether it be judge-led, whether it would be led by civil servants, etc., etc. We can come back to that, and the Commission is going to be saying more in relation to that. But I think a more general point probably is that an inquiry should also look at Northern Ireland specifically. The devolved nations had a different approach, some of which was led by the UK more generally, some of which followed its own route. So we can't simply be swept up in a UK-wide inquiry, it seems to me. We should also have a Northern Ireland focused one, but there is a lot of overlap as well. And we did take the lead on a number of issues from Westminster. So finding a way really of putting as much information into the public domain, explaining why decisions were made, how they will be made in the future, trying to show a human rights approach, and not just giving lip service to that, but really looking at what that means in relation to consideration of each individual who's been affected by the pandemic. In relation to what's been said about a two-tier society, again, I do recognise, and I don't seek to diminish the premise of that question, which is that COVID passports or requirements to be vaccinated, etc., will limit some people's movement, free movement, and ability to participate in a lot of events. But I go back really to what I said about science and the medical advice behind this. A lot of this is going to be influenced by and should really be directly led by what they're saying about the transmissibility of this virus, about the way to protect people. And it has long been the case that certain of our rights are capable of being limited if it is to protect others, and public health is one of those things. So rights can be balanced, and the human rights approach would, in my view, ensure that the right balance is found. But I'm afraid we all have some restrictions placed upon the exercise of our rights, and there are other people better placed probably to decide where that line is. The Commission is, however, looking very closely at this, and we'll be keeping on top of all the restrictions, and we'll be reporting, I think, more closely. David, you've been responsible for this the whole period of the pandemic. Do you want to say something?
Well, I know there's a specific question, and I think you've already answered it, about should a public inquiry be devolved? And in response to that question, I guess what I would say is at the minute, the Commission's position is we know that the UK inquiry has been announced, and there should be a meaningful engagement if that inquiry goes ahead in order to address the issues here. And anything that falls outside of that at the minute, we believe should be dealt with separately if it isn't going to be dealt with appropriately within the UK-wide inquiry. So we're waiting to see what the announcement is with regards to how it's going to be handled by the devolved administration. I think that's fair enough. I don't know whether you wanted to add to that, Alison. It was a very specific question.
Yeah, I think all I would add is I don't think there can't be one or the other. I think it has to be both. So there is an awful lot operated on a UK-wide basis, some of which affected what was done in Northern Ireland. But there will be a lot going on in the GB inquiry that will not consider specific circumstances in Northern Ireland or the decision-making that happened here and how we diverged. So it's got to be both, I think. The overlap and the lessons can be learned from both as well. It's going to be a really important aspect of it. So we need to be involved in the UK-wide one, but we also need to have our own. A little bit having cake and eating it, but I don't think it's one or the other.
And sorry, I missed a part of a question earlier, again, COVID related, which is wider than these shores, but also relevant to here, about what your feeling is about the general thrust that appears to be happening globally, according to this question, around changes to law that have affected rights to protest and censorship, and a move towards more authoritarian restrictions on rights as a consequence of COVID.
That's a big topic, and that crosses so many different themes. If you're talking about the right to essentially manifest religion, to express your opinion, to assemble together, and the reason I put it like that is there's no right to protest as such, but it's the reading together of those rights which enables people to assert the right to protest. And shorthand, we always say the right to protest. is absolutely key in any democracy. And I believe that, as does the Commission. However, it's not an unqualified right. And exercise of that right may well impact on others, and it may impact disproportionately on others in a way that they can't exercise their rights. It's always important to be, I come back every time to saying balance. And I know that for some of you that will be a sort of frustrating word to use or slightly unhelpful word to use because it doesn't give you an outright answer. But balance is what gives you the answer, because you have to look at the various rights under consideration and see how you protect them. And sometimes one person's rights are protected over a different right. For example, access to healthcare may take priority over someone's right to protest about them accessing that healthcare. But it's always a balancing exercise. David, there was a part of that, the authoritarian, yes, there is a risk. I accept and I think appreciate, and we need to be very alive to the fact that when on the face of it, that sounds all very reasonable, there's always a danger when we try to be reasonable and just balance rights, that advantage is taken of that, and an authoritarian government or public authority making those decisions can exploit and can shut down protest that is inconvenient. Protest is really not protest at all if it's not inconvenient and about which people will disagree. But that doesn't mean you have a right to protest anywhere, anytime, about anything. We do need to watch how the rules are used, and the Commission very much keep an eye on that. And if you have any specific cases or examples where you think it has become authoritarian within our jurisdiction, I would certainly like to hear about that.
If I could just add before I go to the next question on that point, yeah, I mean, we have been very careful, and again, you'll see it in a number of the submissions we've been making and advice to the Assembly and Executive during the pandemic, that these measures that are introduced must be temporary, they have to be time limited, and as least evasive as possible. They should be necessary, and we're very alive to anything introduced being removed at the earliest possible opportunity. A good example of it was some of the measures that were introduced around children's services. The Commission worked quite closely with the Committee for Health to make sure that anything the department was introducing was being subject to a good level of scrutiny, and those were removed, I know, at the first possible opportunity. Orla asks a very specific question, just to change tact beyond the pandemic, from NSPCC. She notes the recommendation to the Department of Justice to repeal the defence of reasonable chastisement of children. And she wants to know, how do we think a political consensus could be achieved to ensure the protection of children?
I'm sorry, David, I lost you slightly there.
Sorry. The question, yeah, the question is on removing the defence of reasonable punishment of the child by the Department of Justice, and specifically, how do we think a political consensus can be achieved to ensure this?
I think just to make best use of the few minutes we have left, what I would suggest is that you go to, we can share with you again the submission we made in relation to the miscellaneous, the Justice Bill, where this was supposed to be considered. And we've set out there how we consider the approach should be, and the human rights considerations that go into that. Political consensus, goodness, I'm only a human rights commissioner, I'm only a lawyer. If I could achieve political consensus on issues like that, then I think I would just retire tomorrow and consider my life well worth living. I don't know is the answer to that, but perhaps by addressing some of the, as I called it earlier, misinformation, disinformation, and how a human rights approach can be used without affecting anybody else's rights, maybe that's the way forward.
Thanks, and that's a nice segue. I'm going to come back up to Paul's question because I felt it might be a good one as we headed towards the end. And Paul has asked, when you talk about helping the public understand what human rights are, what does this look like in reality? And can you give some practical examples of how we can help people realise the benefits and the need to protect rights? It's
everything we're going to be doing, I think, for the next 12 months, it's not that people are incapable of understanding, it's that they are in receipt of a whole slew of stuff which doesn't inform, which denigrates human rights, which puts up reasons as to why human rights separate groups out and don't help everyone. We have to address that, but we have to prove it. And I think we prove it in what we do over the next 12 months in relation to some of our litigation, our responses to policy, the assistance we give to others through our law clinic. And it's sort of circular, I suppose. We need to hear from people. We need to get out into the community and really meet people properly, grassroots, individuals, and those who work with them, and talk to them about human rights. I think we have to be prepared to answer questions and really go to those difficult spaces. The Commission can be the place to do that, but we need to get into communities. And I know the Commission was moving towards that last year, just when the pandemic struck. So not that I want to use the pandemic as an excuse, but it has made that more challenging and has maybe meant it's taken a little bit longer than we would like. But giving really practical examples of what it is. So when we talk earlier about pensioners versus prisoners, we have to explain how it actually works in relation to payment of care homes, in relation to funding prisons, etc., what the human rights answer to that is. In relation to vaccinations, we have to explain what that is on a practical basis. And we have to help people achieve their rights on a practical basis, on a practical level. So we are, I suspect, going to be going around in circles for a while. Claire Martin, who's in charge of education at the Commission, has been doing a lot of work really exploring how we do reach into communities and really start to work with them. So we're looking forward to rolling out a new plan in relation to that quite soon. And all I would say to you is, please tell us if you have good ideas that we've missed, and please do tell us, and we will certainly take them up.
That's great. Thanks, Alison. No other questions have managed to sneak in. I think we've addressed almost all of them. I was going to give you the opportunity to say the last few words, because believe it or not, we're actually right on time, which is incredible. But given that you'd raised the issue, I was wondering maybe if you'd like to say something about our strategic planning process.
Yes, we're strategic planning in itself sounds very technical and dry, doesn't it? It sounds like we're going to be writing down a list of treaties and what articles may or may not be breached. That's not, we have to do that because this is a legal framework and we work within the law. But strategic planning is actually just about working out what our priorities should be, really identifying the people and the issues that require attention, and working out a way of doing all the things I said I hope to do, and correcting all the negative rhetoric that I referred to earlier. We want to hear from you. And this is a point I made earlier, and I'm not going to take you over time, David. All I'm going to say is this: we need help to identify and distinguish between those things that the public talk most about, for example, on radio shows, and other things about which the public say very little, but relate to grave human rights abuses. And we rely on you to tell us that and identify those additional issues to us, because they don't tend to come up in surveys, they don't tend to come up in the media, and they often don't come up in our strategic planning processes either. So we need to hear them more directly from people affected. And that enables us then to really subtly change our focus. But it all requires money. And I'm going to ask David to extend our time for 30 minutes so I can talk about money. No, I'm not. It all requires money, and we're working within very, very tight budgets, and maybe about to get tighter. So the more help you can give us, everyone who's joined today, the more grateful we will be.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone for taking your time out to join us today. I hope you've found it really useful, and I would encourage you all to look through the 74 issues that are identified in the annual statement, and please get in touch with the Commission if we can be of any assistance. Have a lovely day. Thanks. Bye.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
And happy Christmas.